Hey everyone, joining me on my deck this evening. I have some time now and I just thought I would film a video, and the title of this video is Let's Talk Through This Together. And that's what I want to do because I really think that I'm kind of determined to piece together what's going on, and it might take a lifetime and I might never figure it out, but I feel like yesterday's video that I did about mitochondrial dysfunction, I had a lot of feedback, comments, emails about that, and people saying you're onto something. And I got recommended by a couple of different people the book Brain Power, or the work of Dr. Chris Palmer. He is a psychiatrist and I believe neuroscience researcher. I could be wrong on the discipline there. It's neuro something. I believe it's neuroscience. And I want to just, I'm binge listening to this audiobook. It's fascinating and it reminds me a lot of my own thought process about protracted withdrawal. So hear me out, and I haven't read the whole book, but I want to just discuss this whole thing of protracted withdrawal and try to siphon it out in a video with you guys, because so what he talks about in the book, and from what I've read in like the synopsis and the reviews, sorry about the dog barking, is that metabolic / mitochondrial dysfunction is at the root of mental illness. And obviously psychiatric drug withdrawal is not mental illness. I'm not saying that it is, but I'm just saying that I personally believe that there is an underlying mechanism to protracted withdrawal specifically that maybe we're not quite looking at, because I've said in videos before, the up and down regulation of receptors is oversimplified in my opinion. I'm not saying that it's not part of it, but to me it doesn't explain the wide range of healing times. Why do some people heal in 6 months? Why are some people protracted 10, 12 years? If it's just about the receptors healing, that seems a little bit oversimplified to me. And I mentioned in, I think it was yesterday's video, or maybe it was the day before, that maybe it's more of a sensitized receptors. Because if you look at, there are lots of stories in the forums and people I've talked to where they'll be healed or feel healed for 2 or 3 years even. And then it'll take something like alcohol or maybe even just emotional stress and they go back into akathisia. So does that mean their receptors weren't quite healed? Does it mean they were resensitized? And if we're just boiling it down to GABA, say in the case of benzos, it would kind of make sense that alcohol, or it would make sense that it might resensitize the GABA receptors because alcohol acts on GABA. But what about people who go back into it from life stress, or who go into it from something that seems to be unrelated to GABA? That never really made sense to me. And so I want to kind of explore, is there potentially a different cause that's maybe contributing more to this problem than just receptors? Because in this book, from what I've seen and read so far, heard I guess, because it's the audiobook, so he talks about how in psychiatry, as we know, it's all based on signs and symptoms, or symptoms, like subjective symptoms. There's no objective diagnostic criteria to diagnose mental illness. You can't get a blood test. There's no definitive, objective, measurable thing that will define depression. And so the DSM is put together by a panel of psychiatrists who decide, okay, if you've had 5 symptoms of depression for 2 weeks or longer, this constitutes clinical depression. It's all subjective. And so that is not satisfactory for a lot of people, or most people, and including doctors and the ones who are like him, I guess, and who are thinking about these things, like what's going on here. And so he says, why is someone who has, say, one mental illness diagnosis then way more susceptible to many more, either at the same time or throughout their lives? So he uses an example of a guy, I think he was in his 40s, and he had like 6 labels at that point. It started out with ADHD as a child, and then it morphed into bipolar disorder, Asperger's syndrome, anxiety disorder, major depression. I think he had a psychotic episode or schizoaffective. And so why is that happening? And as you probably know, you could go to 10 different doctors, describe your symptoms. I'm talking here about like organic mental illness, and get 10 different diagnoses. So obviously the science is lacking. That's an understatement. And so he's like, a lot of these syndromes or a lot of these psychiatric labels, they overlap. And I've noticed that and come across that a lot. Like when I was coaching like crazy before, people would come to me and say, you know, I'm having this, and they would describe their symptom and they would say, is this anhedonia? Is this DPDR? Is this depression? What is this? And I mean, I'm not in a position, obviously, to diagnose people, but I would say let's not focus on the labels because they overlap so much and they're really arbitrary anyway. The overarching problem is you have some type of nervous system dysfunction. And I've seen comments on videos of people in this community, and some will say this is irreversible, permanent brain damage. And let's just playing devil's advocate. If that was the case, like say everybody who suffers protracted withdrawal has irreversible neuron death, brain damage. Let's just go with that. To me, it doesn't make sense still, because then why do some people or most people recover? Would you then say, well, they're lying about their recovery? And some people might say, well, yeah, they're lying about their recovery. Okay, well, let's go with that. They're lying about their recovery. So they went from bedridden, they went from pacing and screaming all day to now they can land a job. So are they just faking it? You know, maybe they are. Let's just go with that. Maybe they're faking it. Okay, so let's just say that. It also doesn't make sense then, if that were the case, and if these drugs cause cell death, brain damage, then why doesn't everyone get brain damage? That also doesn't make sense. So then other people will say, well, it's genes or it's gene mutations. Well, then how come members of the same family, like even in my case, my mom, my brother, cold turkey medications, completely fine. Why do I have so many issues or had so many issues from a 3-month reinstatement? Like that didn't make any sense to me either. And then we look at maybe it's epigenetic. I mean, you can go down all these different rabbit holes, but to break it down simply, maybe it's not about that at all. Maybe it's like something underlying that's causing everything. And maybe the drugs were just the final straw. And this is where I get into the mitochondrial dysfunction. And again, I'll probably do another video once I get through this whole book and just continue to review it and share my thoughts on it. But when we look at tinnitus, so I talked about this in my video yesterday. Tinnitus has so many seemingly completely unrelated causes, or in the guy's theory of the course that I took, he calls it the final domino that fell, which to me makes more sense, because how can you go to a loud concert, and get tinnitus? And my friend will take autotoxic benzos and get tinnitus. Why will then the next person get tinnitus from pregnancy hormones? The next person will get it from COVID. Those don't really seem related, like a loud concert and pregnancy and COVID, but yet the symptom and the result is the same. You have this ringing, hissing, thumping, pulsatile tinnitus, tea kettle sound in your head, in your ears, whatever. How is that possible? And so like I look at protracted withdrawal, and I've made videos about this before where I've noticed that there's these conditions that they seem very complex. They don't have specific diagnostic criteria necessarily, and nobody really knows what's happening with them either. So for the purposes of this video, let's talk about long COVID, chronic Lyme disease, mast cell activation syndrome, post-finasteride syndrome, even topical steroid withdrawal. So I spent time in all of these Facebook groups just for curiosity's sake. I went on the Reddits and subreddits, and they are eerily similar. If you look at them, a lot of them have the windows and waves pattern, or they call it different jargon in different groups. A lot of people will develop, like they have similar symptoms. So if you look in the long COVID group, they have neurological symptoms from a respiratory illness. So they have internal vibrations, they have tinnitus, they have burning skin, they have vertigo, they have a lot of the same symptoms that people in withdrawal have. And when you look at post-finasteride syndrome, so there's discussions in the post-finasteride groups about what happened, how did this drug interact with male hormones? So finasteride is a hair loss drug. And so all the discussions in the group are about the male hormones, what happened to the testosterone, the androgens, whatever. And so they're trying to figure it all out. They're like narrowing it down. But the overarching thing is so similar. These people develop sensitivities to anything that even resembles male hormones, and they're having these extreme reactions after finasteride use to like supplements and anything that resembles anything close to like a male hormone, anything, and even things that don't even seem to be related to male hormones. They're just suddenly sensitive and reactive to all these things. They have flare-ups and flare-downs, and they have like neurological symptoms across a lot of these different long, like kind of obscure conditions. Mast cell activation syndrome is another one. People develop all of these sensitivities. They develop neurological symptoms. They develop this like chronic itching. And people in the finasteride group too, they'll explain akathesic type symptoms from finasteride, and maybe it acts on psychiatric, maybe it doesn't, I don't know. But same with chronic Lyme disease. Why do some people can have a tick burrow in them and nothing happens, and other people will take antibiotics and they'll be fine, and other people will be sick for years on end? And I mean, you could use the argument, well, the antibiotics caught it early and got rid of all of the bacteria, or you could, but it just seems like it's not that simple in any of these. And same with COVID. And why are people in protracted withdrawal so reactive to COVID? If you search in the forums, you'll notice that people in protracted withdrawal or in withdrawal or who are hyper reactive because of psych drugs, they just go into complete chaos due to COVID. Even people who are 7 or 8 years off and doing okay, COVID will just snap them right back. So again, does that mean that the brain cells came alive again and then they went away, like they just died again? Or to me, that just, it doesn't explain it. And so this book that I'm reading, that he's talking about mental illness, how he's like, the labels are arbitrary, all of it is subjective. People are so much more susceptible to multiple ones, and it progresses over time. They have a high rate of relapse. Is there an underlying mechanism to all of them? And I want to talk about autoimmunity as well, because I have 2 autoimmune diseases, type 1 diabetes and celiac disease. Why are people with autoimmune disease so much more susceptible to multiple? You're like 5 times more likely to have celiac disease once you have type 1 diabetes. And we tend to think of the body in clusters. So if you think about it, so I had a virus shortly after my 16th birthday. I got sick, and shortly after that I descended into severe diabetes. Okay, so my body attacked itself, it shut down my pancreas, it produces no insulin. I have to inject it exogenously. Why does that then set me up for celiac disease, which seemingly has nothing to do with the pancreas? Why does my body and immune system remain on high alert? Like, what is the underlying mechanism? And I've been kind of baffled by this for so long, because the explanations, specifically in the protracted community, just aren't satisfactory to me. It doesn't explain why people recover. It doesn't explain why not everyone who takes psychiatric drugs are affected. And genes don't seem to explain it fully, because members of the same family have completely different experiences. Why does, you go into withdrawal or you get akathisia, why are you then susceptible to continue to get it even from non-psychiatric drug causes? And if you want to chime in here, like, let me know, like, do you think that there's more to it going on? And this is why I'm exploring mitochondrial dysfunction and now metabolic dysfunction as I get more into this brain energy book. But it just is, to me, it's just not a satisfactory enough answer. And even with the tinnitus thing, the guy that I follow, I mean, he has a ton of testimonials, and I've actually talked to people who have implemented his theory and his way of working through mitochondrial dysfunction and have resolved their tinnitus. And again, like, tinnitus is, if I'm playing devil's advocate, if we go with, well, protracted withdrawal is permanent. You know, some people say that it is, and most people will say, no, you recover, or the majority of people recover. Tinnitus, even in the medical community, is considered permanent. Like, if you get a tinnitus diagnosis, you have the audio test done, they'll tell you, your ENT will tell you it's permanent. Like, that's just the consensus. But then why are there these people turning it around? Like, and if you compare protracted withdrawal with cell brain death and tinnitus with the stereocilia inside the ear has been damaged beyond repair, it doesn't grow back, that's why it's permanent. Why are people turning it around? So he breaks that down in his course. He's like, does this mean that the hairs grow back? Does this mean that they weren't fully broken in the first place? Does this mean that broken stereocilia don't actually cause tinnitus? And is there something else causing it? And so that's sort of the devil's advocate I'm playing with the psych drugs, because again, it doesn't explain how someone like me, for instance, and so many people I talk to, can take psychiatric drugs for years and be completely stable and fine, normal, that was me, and then come off it for whatever reason, pregnancy, debt, just can't afford it, or don't think it's working anymore, or just want to be pharma free, come off, and then that same person goes on the same drug 1 or 2 years later, and just boom, their system just implodes. Like, what does that mean? There was only a certain level of brain damage for a while, and now all of a sudden it's just the last neuron has died and you're screwed? Or is it something else? Like, I'm just trying to, like, talk this through, because it just doesn't make sense to me. And again, if these drugs cause brain damage, we're not talking about correlation, A causes B, then why doesn't everyone get that? And if it does, and even if it did cause it in everybody, why do some people, or everybody in this population even, then why do people come out of it? Like, it doesn't make sense. Do the neurons grow back? And why do they grow back at different rates in different people? You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just playing devil's advocate here. It just doesn't make sense to me. And so as I explore this book further, I'll update you guys, because again, protracted withdrawal is not mental illness. I get protracted withdrawal is not long COVID, but I just find it interesting that so many of these things overlap. So many of them have such similar trajectories, yet they all are from seemingly different causes. And two, like, there's people who get akathisia from antibiotics. So does that mean that they're affecting the brain? I mean, absolutely, it could be. You know, people get it from severe from an antiemetic drug like Reglan, or they get it from Compazine. But like, my massage therapist recently told me she was on Reglan. Of course, I then was like, what, you're taking Reglan? And she was completely fine. So obviously A doesn't necessarily cause B. There's a correlation, because pretty much everyone in this community is harmed by psych drugs or something similar to it. But you know, most people recover. Some people are never harmed by these drugs. The same person can thrive on a drug, and then the same drug will cause a catastrophic reaction years later. I mean, I don't know. What do you guys think about this? What is the deal with all these similarities across these conditions? And I think we boil it down again to the psych drug caused this, or the finasteride caused this, or, you know, the spike protein from COVID caused this. But when you look at them all together, like 30,000 foot overview, they're so similar. So maybe something else is underlying all of them. It's just food for thought. Let me know what you think. And I probably forgot something, but I'm just rambling. So I hope you guys are doing well, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.